ELB Learning has partnered with us with a great benefits package for all members of Training Magazine Network. The items you see on the left there, you get the periodic table of instructional design, the designer's infographic, and amped up power kit, which PowerPoint kit, which has all sorts of icons and figures and a like for you to use and images for you to use. And again, that's for all members of Training Magazine Network. And also, if you have Membership Plus in our community, you get even more. The Heirloom Course Starters from Lectora, and that's a $798 value. And also Showcase Courses, which has a $1,300 or actually almost $1,400 value, and a game board. So make sure you check that out. And if you don't have Membership Plus already, you should. And I'll go ahead and put more information about that in chat. And we hope that you use these great benefits. And again, thanks to ELB Learning for making this very special benefits package available to our members. Thank you to ELB Learning for making today's event possible too. So make sure and unlock your employees' performance. And people are the greatest asset, but the most training fails to unlock their potential. Learn how to do that. Unlock your employees' potential with ELB Learning. Click on your screen, and thank you again for making today's event possible, ELB Learning. Now let's get today's event started. From boomers to zoomers, cracking the code of cross-generational engagement with Ellen Burns Johnson. Ellen, welcome to Training Magazine Network.
Hello, hello, everyone. It's good to see you. Thanks for the warm welcome and introduction.
You're welcome, Ellen. Welcome again. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. So everyone was typing in chat about where they're from and what the weather's like, and I'm currently broadcasting from Duluth, Minnesota, where it is in the mid-60s Fahrenheit. So there's a very large lake to the east of me, and it kind of keeps everything cool during the summer, which, based on what I'm seeing in the chat, I'm grateful for. There are some 100-degree temps out there right now, and that sounds brutal. Okay. Okay, I think some folks are reporting some audio troubles, so I'll just kind of call back to what Philip said earlier about using the plus in the chat window to reach out to him for some technical support. And yes, Third Street Bakery, amazing locally baked bread. Anyway, we're not going to take you on a tour of Duluth, Minnesota. You'll just have to come visit yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about cross-generational engagement and really some high-level approaches for how we can untangle those knots. A little more about me. I'm the VP of Learning Strategy at ELB Learning. And what that means is I work with and lead a group of learning strategists who partner with our customers to tackle their problems, right? And because L&D touches how people learn and how they perform, that means we're really touching every part of every organization potentially. So we help make sense of that complexity. Me personally, I've had over a decade in consulting for L&D with some time in writing and in K-12 prior to that. Done curriculum architecture, learning strategy, instructional design, and I specialize in highly interactive experiences. So game-based learning is really my favorite thing to talk about. Please reach out to me at any point if you want to talk about that or anything else learning related. Some other things about me. I am an agile practitioner. So for a while I was Scrum certified. I'm no longer certified, but I still think in the language of iteration and collaboration. I am a dog owner ×2. One dog is not in the office with me because she was sprayed by a skunk last week. And the other one, hopefully you won't see him. Hopefully he'll be not a problem. I'm a game designer. So I mentioned that interactive experiences are, where my passion lies. In terms of instructional design and learning creation, but I also do a little bit of independent game development on the side with a few friends. And so I really like to be able to blend that experience and blend those skills, and work in L&D allows us to do that. Last piece, the last thing about me that I'll share today is I am a millennial. Sorry, that's where I'm coming from. We're not just talking about millennials today. We'll be talking a little bit about everyone. And that brings me to my first poll for you all. I want to know, what generation are you in? These are kind of the loose time ranges that are associated with these different groups. You'll see different ranges from different sources. So we'll just go with these numbers for now, but also just whatever you call yourself if someone ever asks you this question. There's a poll on screen. I see a lot of our Gen Xers are typing in chat. A couple Gen Ys. I saw one baby boomer in there. Someone is inventing a new generation called Generation Jones. Sounds cool. That'll be interesting. Some Zennials. The Zennials are the folks who are kind of right on the cusp between Gen X and Gen Y. And looking at the poll responses, we've got mostly Gen X in here today, which I'm not really surprised about. I think we've got 22% baby boomers. So you should be able to look at the results with me. 46% Gen X, Gen Y at 31%, and we have a couple Gen Z folks in here today. Thank you for coming. And this is a little bit more of a drastic distribution. I think the last time I asked an audience this question, I think the last time I was in a meeting where I was asked this question, we had a little bit more of a neck-to-neck divide between Gen Y and Gen X, but Gen X is far and away the most well represented, at least here on the webinar today. And then, yeah, there's also Gen Alpha. My nephews are Gen Alpha. They probably won't be on today's webinar. They have other things they're going to want to watch. Now, the next poll is also important. We've talked about what generation you're in. What generation makes up the majority of your workforce? It's equally important, right? We want to understand our own perspectives, but how about the people that we're building learning for, that we're designing programs for, that we're maintaining those programs for? We've got the same four responses to choose from: Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and Boomers. Gen Y, again, the millennials, and Gen Z, again, called Zoomers from time to time. Okay, so here it's interesting. We see kind of a split, right? Still mostly Gen X and Gen Y. A lot fewer in the baby boomers category when you talk about the generations represented in the workforce, more in Gen Z. And in this, so for this poll, it looks like the leading generation represented in the population is Gen Y, so the millennials, my fellow avocado toast people. Yes. Okay. So I think that makes a lot of sense. This is kind of reflecting the population trends that we're seeing. And one of the big topics you'll see in workforce development right now is the fact that so many baby boomers are nearing retirement and going through retirement. And what does that mean for, changing how we do processes and making sure knowledge gets transferred from one generation to the next? So we do have a more diverse generational makeup than ever. And we have challenges that are associated with that makeup and also opportunities. So today's session is going to look into how we can kind of bring in the richness of experience and perspectives that come with a workforce made up of many generations. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenge of bridging gaps, whether that's communication style, we've got technological fluency, learning preferences. I think we talk about the challenges of overcoming these obstacles often, but there are also opportunities, right? If we can overcome these opportunities or at least work on them a little bit more, it means we can foster a more innovative, empathetic, and more dynamic workplace. I think the key is understanding and respecting each generation's unique contributions while finding common ground. It isn't really about smoothing over differences. It's about kind of elevating collective strengths. And while I will talk about generations as these big generalities today, I'm also going to talk about the fact that we're all individuals too. So we do want to eventually take it to that level if we can. All right, Kaylee mentioned that they still have the silent generation at that organization. So a fifth generation is represented. I hope they're having a good time. Okay. So yes, in today's session, we're going to kind of follow this outline. We're going to talk a little bit more about the population trends. We're going to look at the tendencies and work habits by generation. We're going to examine some biases and stereotypes and maybe kind of flip those so we can start breaking them down a little bit for ourselves. And then we'll share some strategies that can help people of all ages engage with learning. We are going to look at strategies that help us build learning experiences or systems that help everyone engage And then in doing that, we're going to increase participation, we're going to reduce turnover, and we're going to just heighten employee engagement, not just with learning, but ideally with their roles, with their work, with their team members. Okay, so US population, we talked about what happens in your workforce and how it's broken down. We talked about how our particular group of folks on the webinar today is broken down. This is what the overall population looks like right now. So this is from the Brookings Institution, and also some Pew Research as a source. We've got 21%, 22% about is baby boomers, so it's about a fifth. Less than a fifth is Gen X. Gen X is known as one of the smaller generations in terms of just sheer number of people and that are categorized that way. Gen Y, a little bit more, 22%. Gen Z around 20%, and then we've got that other category. So that includes the silent generation, that's 1925, 1945, and then Gen Alpha, kind of the early 2010s through today. And I think next year is also going to be considered Gen Alpha. Again, my nephews, all the memes that you're probably seeing online about Gen Alpha, that's those folks. So this is the current makeup. You see, I think at this scale, everything looks fairly balanced, but of course, it's not a static thing, right? The population is moving through these categories and everything is kind of is shifting constantly. So the population, like I said, is this makeup. The workforce, though, is different. Just like the way that we talked about our webinar attendees being of one particular makeup, our workforce is going to be different than the general population. So when it comes to the workforce, kind of reflects a little bit of what we were seeing on the webinar today, right? In our polls, we have a lot of Gen X, a lot of Gen Y, some baby boomers, and some Gen Z. So I think compared to the US workforce overall, we have on this call a little bit overrepresentation of Gen X and a little bit underrepresentation of Gen Z. That's interesting. I'm not going to make anything of it. It's just interesting. So I talked just a moment ago in the previous slide about how that's going to transform, right? So in the next 10 years, the way that this looks and the way that our population looks, these two charts are going to change drastically for how they compare to one another, right? So we have baby boomers retiring. Obviously, it's one of the biggest generations in this, in the world's history, at least in the United States specifically. We're going to be seeing a marked decline in their presence in the workplace. So this slice of the pie is shrinking. It isn't just about numbers dwindling, it's also about that experience and that knowledge transitioning out of our daily work environments. So there are more tools than ever before to store information. But when it comes to, I think, the most powerful way of helping people learn, which is that face-to-face or at least person-to-person interaction, a lot of the people who hold a ton of experience and knowledge are no longer going to be as available as before for those face-to-face or person-to-person conversations and coaching. Millennials are Gen Y. I saw somebody ask a question. Yep. Okay, I'm seeing some audio issues. I'm just going to check in with Philip here just to make sure that it's not me.
It might be because I'm hearing you clearly, and it looks like we're getting good reports here. So it might be just intermittent on your headset. If that looks like it might be wireless.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wireless. Okay. I do have a wired mic that I can switch to if we need to. It's
well,
just
so far so good.
Okay. All right. I'm keeping an eye on chat, so
Great.
Let me know if that if that problem continues.
Great.
Okay, there was a question earlier that I saw fly by in the chat about where did millennials go. That's Gen Y. It's the same thing. It's just millennials, Gen Y. I don't know why baby boomers never got a letter. I feel like that's unfair. Okay, so we've talked about the makeup of the workforce and the population. Let's talk a little bit about some of the tendencies and trends that these generational categories are associated with. So our baby boomers, again, 1946 to 1964, thereabouts. They, again, represent a smaller but still significant portion of the workforce. They're bringing in those decades of experience and knowledge. The values and tendencies associated with baby boomers in the workforce, in the workplace, are that strong work ethic. They're experienced and knowledgeable. They value face-to-face conversation, and I'll try to make a distinction between person-to-person and face-to-face because a lot of our interactions are person-to-person right now, but they're mediated through, online experiences. So we're talking about face-to-face conversation. They are adapted to current digital communication tools, but they still value phone calls and emails. Another patterns that are associated with our baby boomers are respect for their, they kind of expect respect for the experience and knowledge, and they appreciate recognition and opportunities to mentor younger colleagues. Now, some negative stereotypes are that our baby boomers are resistant to change, but I kind of want to flip that negative stereotype on its head and think about some alternative stories, right? If you've spent decades in the workforce, you're going to be thinking a little bit about sunk costs. You've put in a ton of work refining your skills according to a particular paradigm. With any big change, you have to ask yourself, is it worth making that change to deviate from something that I know well and I can do well? And so it's not necessarily just resistance for its own sake. I think that there's additional layers to that particular perspective. Yes, and as Ron mentioned, all generations are resistant to change. It's just what does it change and what does it feel like might be different from person to person and from group to group. Yes, I also like Carla's note there. Dad's a boomer and he rebuilds computers. He's in his late 70s. Not all boomers are resistant to technology. Love that. Okay, let's talk about Gen X. Most of you on the call are Gen X, so please correct me if any of these seem off base. So Gen X, roughly 1965 to 1980. This might cover some folks who consider them in the Zennial category, which is kind of right between Gen X and Gen Y. Gen X is associated with being independent and adaptable, valuing that work-life balance. Gen X is associated with seeking opportunities for skill development and career advancement. That might be just a Gen X feature, or it might be just kind of where everyone is in their career. I think there is an association with Gen X about kind of having an affinity for technology rather, but also valuing directness. So they're formal with both, they're comfortable with formal and informal communication, but the point is being efficient. Disciplined and dependable is what I'm seeing in chat. Okay, negative stereotypes with Gen X can sometimes be that Gen Xers are cynical and disengaged. My alternate story that I want to propose for that is there's a low tolerance for wasting time. We talked about efficiency, right? If we kind of take the cynical and disengaged as a negative stereotype and look at it in more of a positive light, that's kind of all right, why do we need to be in this meeting? Why are we all here? What's the point? Couldn't this have been an email? And that's not an unreasonable or an undesirable trait. Yeah, Gen X works smarter, not longer. And oh my God, that is so me, preach. Okay. Okay, let's talk about the millennials for a little bit. Millennials, I'm one of those. Collaborative, valuing flexibility and work-life balance. Work-life balance, it's a theme, interesting. Collaborative for sure. I'm one of the people who probably annoys my Gen X colleagues when I just open up a Slack huddle and say, come on in, have a side by side. I have a completely remote team, so I kind of like having that connection and recreating the feeling of being around a table and just getting work done. So that's kind of a stereotypical millennial thing. Prioritizing meaningful work and opportunities for growth. Yes, absolutely. That you can find meaning in all sorts of different work that you do. That's important to me. It's important for a lot of other millennials to the degree that it's kind of a stereotype. Millennials are also referred to as digital natives, comfortable working with a variety of communication platforms, particularly texting, social media, the quick on-the-go interactions. I do think it's interesting, and we'll come back to this later, just because you're comfortable with a technology doesn't mean you're necessarily automatically good at applying it to business problems or organizational challenges, kind of a different context. Collaborative work environments, like I mentioned, flexibility in work arrangements, being able to work from home and then come into the office, only working from home, digital nomad sort of thing. Those things are often associated with millennials. And then frequent constructive feedback is something that's associated with millennials in terms of what they're looking for. A negative stereotype with millennials is that they are frequently changing jobs and not loyal to their employers. I think that the negative the alternate story around that is, again, if we're driven to find meaningful work and a workplace isn't providing it, there are many other workplaces out there. So if we're providing millennial employees, well, all employees, opportunities to grow and learn, that's also helping to create meaning. And I think that's something that we want to provide for everybody. The other thing I will say is, this doesn't mean I don't mean to change the topic of today's conversation, but for many industries, you can get a much bigger raise if you change employers. And that's just the market force at work then. So if we don't like that, we should maybe look at how we do raises. Different webinar though. Let's talk about Gen Z. Yeah, and then we have Laura saying, I'm a millennial and I've been with the same company for 17 years. Yeah, exactly. These are really just large generalizations. You're always going to be able to find a ton of exceptions. And I want to talk about that a little bit more later. Ooh, yeah, Deb asked a really good question. I'll get to that in a second. First, I want to talk about Gen Z. So Gen Z are Zoomers. The range is roughly 1997, which was a great year for music, by the way, 1997 to 2012. The newest entrants to the workforce, true digital natives, and they are associated with valuing authenticity, social responsibility, and innovation. I think with younger generations is where we often get stories and stereotypes of being entitled or too distracted, maybe too dependent on technology. I think the way we need to remember to flip that on its head is it's not, easily distracted. It's not entitlement. It's younger with less experience to draw from. I think with all of these categories, not just with Gen Z, but with all of these categories, and this gets to Deb's question, these are broad generalizations. And we should never rely on broad generalizations to guide our interactions with individuals. Regardless of someone's age, we should be less judging and more enabling. So I think we want less judging and more open dialogue
And
because
Ellen,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're still seeing the millennial slide. Did it advance on your side?
Oh,
And
I pressed the wrong button.
okay, there we go. Great, thanks.
There we go. Yeah, got to show the right device. Anyway, right. So less judging and more open dialogue, right? Because that's really the point is being able to connect with other people, adopt a different perspective, understand where they're coming from, and then take that information and help generalize it into work, right? When we're doing learning, a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to help people grow at scale. And so there's going to be a need to put people into buckets. It doesn't have to be generational buckets. It can be other sorts of buckets. But this is just one way you can look at your population of learners and think about different perspectives. So you can go and have conversations with individuals who might adopt those perspectives and learn more about where they're coming from. I think regardless of what generation you're from, whether you're a baby boomer in your 70s rebuilding computers, or you're a Zoomer who's decided that they're going to spend every weekend for 48 hours completely disconnected from technology, everyone's got their own unique thing to contribute, and we need to lean into that to be able to learn from each other. Okay. So speaking with the idea of generalities, I wanted to kind of lean into this idea a little bit by looking at an example. These generational categories, I think, do run the risk of reinforcing stereotypes instead of dispelling them because they are these big categories. And while a person might fit into a category here in one aspect of their life, they might completely break the mold in another aspect of their life. So when we talk about generations, we have to remember if we're trying to think about ways to apply insights from generational thinking, we have to think about those generations and the groups of people within them as having maybe tendencies. It's not a formula, right? So here's an example of maybe how a tendency shouldn't be taken as a formula. Okay, so this has to do with attention spans is my specific example. Probably heard if you've been in the learning and development industry for a while, you've probably heard some discussion about this over the past several years, and that's this idea of this shortening attention span. I think some of the leading research around this came from Gloria Mark. She's a doctorate, a psychologist, and professor of informatics at the University of California in Irvine. She studies how technology affects our attention. So in 2004, Gloria started are measuring attention spans with a stopwatch. And so she'd watch somebody do something, and they'd look at the minutia of their body language to see what would happen, and how long it would take for them to look away or to do something different. And she would record how long people would spend on tasks and looking at screens at work. And they would do that by just having somebody in, like, alongside them in the desk. It sounds like one of the most tedious research assistant positions you could possibly get. But it resulted in some pretty granular data. So basically, as soon as they got to a screen, they would click start. As soon as they turned away or changed what their screen was looking at, or changed tasks per se, they would click stop, and that's how they kind of judged how long attention span would take, or how long time on task would be. So in 2004, when they measured this, the time on task was 2.5 minutes, and then around 2012, they found it to be 75 seconds. So it's just a little bit over a minute. And then over the last 5 or 6 years, when they've done the same things to measure attention span in the same ways, they found it to be 47 seconds. So that's a 37% reduction. So that's pretty significant drop off. My question for everybody when I bring this up is, does it matter? So when we talk about a tendency versus a formula, we can talk about the tendency for attention spans to get shorter, maybe less 2.5 minutes and more 47 seconds. When we talk about it not really being a formula, what I'm saying is that doesn't translate to anything different in what we should be doing with learning and development, right? When we talk about how we should be doing L&D, how we should be doing training, we have, it's always been a good idea to work in a mix of activities and a mix of exercises, a mix of different content types, a mix of different modalities and perspectives. That's just best practice. And so even though we have this tendency happening in the background, the way that people learn overall and the way that we can design learning to be effective at scale isn't necessarily affected by that tendency. Okay. So on that note, before we take a brief Q&A break, to make sure that we're not turning tendencies into formulas when they shouldn't be, do some thoughtful design thinking before you begin your project, right? Before you plan and act, consider what forms the basis of your ideas about your learners. Is it just direct experience with the people that you've engaged with the most? How different are those people from your overall learning population? What data backs up your conclusions? Do you have good data? Sometimes it's very difficult to get good data. Even if you have a data-driven organization, it's not necessarily the right data for what you need to do. What caveats should you keep in mind as you plan learning programs for your organization's workforce? Okay. I think interesting thoughts about multitasking and attention span are kind of floating up in the chat. Let's take a quick question break. I saw one big question come in from Deb, which we touched on earlier, about reinforcing stereotypes and how we need to kind of be careful not to do that or to fall into that trap. Philip, have you seen any other interesting questions pop up in the chat window? It has been scrolling fast.
It has been scrolling fast, and yes, Deb's came up earlier, and now's your chance to get your questions in here during our Q&A break. And here, Walter asks, how can we leverage generational diversity to enhance innovation and creativity within our teams?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably the biggest question. And it's not even just about generations, right? It's about how do you get people from all sorts of different perspectives, all sorts of different business units or organizational divisions to come together and innovate. And I think one thing that we've been trying to do more at ELB Learning, and that I've seen used really successfully at other organizations, is a practice from Agile. So if you've ever studied Agile in software development, you know that the development team a Scrum team will get together on a regular basis and do a retrospective. But what you can do is you can create a retrospective with anybody at any time. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very regular one. But what if you ran a retrospective where you brought in people from different generations and made that the focus of the retrospective? What are you noticing in terms of your experience? What do you think needs to change? So on and so forth. Or you could, look at a different kind of retrospective where you're looking at a specific type of inefficiency or problem, and you just make sure that you have employees from different generations that are involved in that retrospective. It's kind of similar to a focus group, but a retrospective is typically something where you're trying to decide what you're going to do differently. So I think that's one really, really good way that you can foster that kind of collaboration and get a lot of perspectives in an efficient way. Um, One of the other things I think is really interesting is looking at the data from learning experiences at scale. So if you're doing a lot of digital learning and you're able to get into that, you can see perhaps you can find ways to get some of that feedback and input from learners as they're taking the courses. So there's some interesting ways you can do that, but I really think it's trying to create as many opportunities you can to get that perspective as possible. And then kind of sharing out what your insights were.
And Carmen asks, do you foresee live training becoming a thing of the past?
Ooh, that's so fascinating. I'm assuming that Carmen means live training in person, right? Rather than virtual instructor-led training.
Here, she's
I
typing
don't,
now.
yeah, okay. All right, I'll wait till she finishes it up. Yep,
Yeah.
live in-person training.
Mhm.
I don't think it's a thing of the past. I think that there's a lot of kind of return to office movement right now, post COVID, um, that might slow down, it might reverse. Either way, I don't think that we're seeing the end of in-person training anytime soon. I think that for some instances, it's the best way to convey information and to get people together to share their unique stories about a specific, you know, piece of practice. I think that the different ways that we bring that live in-person training to bear is we're going to see more and more of those things as the landscape of digital learning tools continues to expand with new technologies enabling new types of interactions and more flexibility. We could see there being instead of kind of the classic bring 160 to 100 people together in a in a lecture hall and do some workshops together, break them out into tables and teams, but it's this kind of very large one-time event. We could see a shift for instructor led training being more small groups kind of worked into the flow of work while still being standardized. And I think that's the challenge, right? I think people appreciate a small group setting as one of the things that they can experience training through. But being able to standardize that is always a challenge for big organizations. So long story short, I don't think we're seeing the end of live in-person training. I do think we're going to see different styles of that um, emerge in the next decade or so.
And Laura says, per Carmen's question, what about live trainings in the virtual environment or VILTS?
Yeah, I think that's I mean I think that's going to continue expanding. I think that there is a lot of recent practice in everyone's fingertips about how to do that kind of engagement online. Some of it probably some people had better experiences during the pandemic than others, I'm sure, when it came to online work and online training. But it's not, it's, I don't think that's going anywhere. Um, I think that what we'll see is probably what I'm hoping we'll see, and what I expect to see, although I think the change will continue to be kind of slow, is a continual shrinking of the time that people will spend in formal training events and in an increase of how that material and those learning experiences get slotted into someone's workday. So maybe fewer big training sessions that are done live, people have to be flown in, and more smaller incremental pieces of training that happen more frequently. I still think that we're going to see more of that trending over time. The exact technologies that we're going to see in order to enable that, I think is still kind of TBD.
And Christina says or asks, when you are in a training session with multiple generations, how do you ensure that everyone is participating and engaging per their generation characteristics?
Oh, that's a good one. So that to me is kind of the perspective reflecting someone who does a lot of live facilitation. Um, And I think that's an interesting thing. I saw some messages in the chat that I reflect my thinking on this. I think when we're talking about, large groups of people, these large population numbers, we'll see these trends. You might not necessarily be able to um, pinpoint exactly how many people are of a certain generation in a group and then treat them a specific way. But you could, as you're designing your session or thinking about how you're going to facilitate it, think, okay, what are some of these big tendencies? What activities am I going to mix in to make people feel comfortable at different points? And then I think chunking it out in different ways. I really like, it's harder to do in a virtual setting, but especially when you're live, kind of thinking about your session in 15-minute chunks. Um, and then mixing up the level of activity or interactivity that you're using in those 15-minute chunks. So thinking about it from a game design perspective, you think about emotional intensity in the game experience. You can't just keep everything at the same level of emotional intensity because that's boring. So you might think of it kind of the same way: more interactivity, less interactivity, more sharing of the decades of expertise and experience that some groups of your audience will have, and more kind of work through a problem and share an experience together. If you're kind of mixing that variety in, you might use the different generational preferences as kind of a checkbox just to make sure you're working in a variety of activities and approaches.
And Gail
Yeah.
says along those lines, how do you manage coming up with a mutual consensus with different generations?
I think it really depends on the problem you're trying to solve and why you need consensus. Um, that is, I think, a really interesting question, and I'm not sure we're going to get to that this way. I would ask the chat to maybe help Gail with some of that. Mutual consensus, I think the way that you go about getting buy-in is going to depend on who's asking the question and what problem you need to solve. Sometimes you don't necessarily need consensus, but you do need some degree of buy-in. And some people might be more hesitant to give their approval to a new course of action than others. So I think that asking questions multiple times in multiple ways is probably your best bet, because then you're going to be connecting with people in different ways, and hopefully connecting with those different groups of people in ways that resonate with them, whether you're grouping them by generation or something else. But the other reason why you probably want to ask for input and ask for people to contribute to consensus in multiple ways over, in multiple times, is that people's thinking evolves. And so the first time you ask the question, they're going to be thinking about it one way, but they're still going to be processing it between that first moment that you ask and the next time that you ask. And so if you're asking for multiple input multiple times, you give people a chance to process and to share some perspectives. Okay. So we've got a little less than 20 minutes left. I'm going to keep going. Some of these things I want to just touch on. We've spoken about this a little bit in high level over the Q&A break, but I wanted to get a little bit more into the application of what we mean with these principles, right? So personalized learning, we talked about how these generational categories are generational categories are generalizations. They're these large tendencies. They're not necessarily a formula. And a formula is, I think, what makes our work easy. If we can have kind of A plus B equals the outcome C that we want, then that makes our design process much easier. It's really more of a build process. We know what A is, we know what B is, combine them, we know it's going to give us C. Rarely does learning break down like that. So I think whenever we can, in our program, breaking down learning into some sort of individualized experience to some degree is going to give us good returns. Some organizations do this if they're larger ones. They can do this by creating learning paths just to support individual career goals and learning preferences. So if you can break things down for someone who is in a specific role, but they're interested in other types of work, maybe create a learning path that enables them to learn more about what they're currently doing, but also with an eye on these other things that they want to explore. That becomes easier if you're breaking down or organizing your curriculum into these bite-sized experiences. So you have to have a really deep understanding of your program to be able to take something that's huge and break it down into these small chunks. But it enables that kind of flexibility that helps cater to individual career goals and preferences. Someone who has a particular job title and is 55 is going to have really different career goals and preferences, perhaps, than someone who has the same job title and is 31. So we want to be able to reflect those individual differences, even if they're doing the same job for the next week or so, right? Personalized learning, it makes the learning more engaging because it's directly relevant. Every learner cares about the same thing. Most, it's them, themselves, and it increases the effectiveness of the learning to be able to align it with the learner's own goals and interests and their pace. So from online workshops, on-site workshops to online courses, if you're doing podcasts or games, offer a variety of formats where you can offer individualized pathing, and then within certain learning experiences, try to offer a variety so people can find something that really resonates with them. Yes, Kathleen says this is differentiation. It's checking on the audio again. Philip, is it still good?
I think they're just, and unfortunately, with some people, just intermittent
Okay.
users. And if that happens, we're just saying exit and come back in. It could be, internet issues or broadband or,
Okay.
and onward. So looks like
Okay.
everyone's good.
Good to know. It sounds like for most people, everyone's good, which means the audio should be good in the recording too. So if there's a chunk
Absolutely.
of conversation that you missed, then you should be able to go back and see that little piece. Okay, technology-enabled flexibility. Individual learning is the best, right? I think that the way that I think about the optimal learning experience is to have a very knowledgeable subject matter expert who's also a great instructional designer sitting on your shoulder helping you learn the thing. That's kind of the optimal experience. You can't do that, right? There aren't enough experts, there aren't enough instructional designers or learning experience designers, and they won't fit on your shoulder anyway. So that's never going to happen. But we can think of that as kind of a platonic ideal and try to find ways that we can offer that sort of experience through different technologies and different ways that we organize our training. So learning experience platforms, that's one of the technologies that can help us reach that level of differentiation or individualization that I spoke about on the previous slide. Usually your LXPs are not just providing a nice user interface that helps learners navigate that differentiated curriculum, but also might be tracking additional data that helps give you information to plan your roadmap for additional parts of your program that you want to build out to keep those learners engaged and growing. Some of these LXPs can auto-generate personalized learning pathways where you can program them in. Adaptive learning platforms is something that I think is starting to emerge a bit more. In order to enable these tools to make, to create this kind of learning experience, you do have to kind of understand your skill inventory. What's the full set of skills that you're trying to cultivate within a certain population? And how do you determine who's competent with those skills and to what degree? So there is a lot of kind of back-end planning and maintenance that needs to happen around that, but the technology is here to help us make use of that. And then, of course, content generation. There's always new innovation happening in content generation. Obviously, it's a pretty crazy time for that right now with the invention, or with the kind of, not the invention, but the more drastic emergence of AI into kind of all parts of the consumer and business landscape. I also want to talk about AI as it comes to adaptive learning. Um, that's another application for it, right? Looking at those large sets of data, making more sense of it, even building in AI into a platform, teaching it to act as a subject matter expert so it can answer learners' questions on the fly. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing more and more now with our customers. And we're building some of those solutions for folks because they want to see that kind of individual communication built right into courseware. Yeah, I think an LXP, this David had asked this question about LXP and LMS, and I think there's probably folks in the chat who will be able to explain that difference better than I can. But we think about, yes, LMS is a learning management system, and the kind of the association with LMS is it's very oriented around completion. Some LMSs have content authoring capabilities. They're usually not incredibly deep. And the idea about doing learning pathways might require a lot of manual administration. Whereas with an LXP, I think this might end up being like, if you look at the fundamentals, might feel like a distinction without a difference because it's still about managing the learning that gets in front of a learner. But with an LXP, the desired implication is that they provide more granular data, more insight into learner behavior and performance, and then more targeted, personalized interventions. Yeah, LXPs are more learner centric. So there's a greater emphasis on the UX and kind of the learner's journey as mediated by the platform. Yeah, Nathan says LMS pathways are a beast to create. Exactly. Okay, I think this is our last poll for the day. I'm curious for, there might be a second poll, but I'm curious for you all. I mentioned AI explicitly just a moment ago, and I want to just see where you all are at. I'm sure you've all been talking about it. I'm sure you've all been having discussions about it and asking questions. But when it comes to the learning ecosystem, how far along in this journey are you and your organization when it comes to incorporating AI? Okay, so answers are still rolling in. Kathleen says, "Yay, this information is making me really nerdily happy." That is amazing. Thank you. That's the goal. I don't just want you to be happy. I also want you to be nerdy. Yeah, okay. So Lyra, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm just kind of reading it. I'm gonna go with Lyra, but yes, I'm not surprised you're not alone, right? It will be a while. We're still figuring things out. Is kind of a space where we're being like, all right, it would be great, but the organization is not allowing it right now for different reasons. And depending on the industry that you're in and the organization that you're in, you might have greater constraints than others on what kind of AI tools that you're able to engage with. A few people, 6% of our respondents today were saying, yes, we have very much started to incorporate AI into the learning ecosystem. So I'm sure that the rest of the attendees would love to hear from you. So please just drop a line or two about what you've been doing in chat, just to kind of share your perspective. I think it can make L&D faster and more effective. Absolutely. It can be hard to get started with it. So some of the things around artificial intelligence that can be useful for L&D, machine learning, that's kind of the underlying approach for a lot of the tools that have emerged over the last couple of years into the business and the consumer spaces. Just machine learning, so that's algorithms that are used to analyze data. You can apply that machine learning approach to learner data to look for trends in behavior and performance. That's also one of the technologies that can enable that personalized learning experience. You're taking some of those insights you get from large amounts of data, and then you're looking at an individual's performance data within a platform and seeing how those things, where they line up and where they diverge. And those divergences might be where you want to put in some interventions, which then you can automate because the platform might be able to take care of that. Natural language processing, that's what powers chatbots, right? So everything that can recognize your phrasing when you use it in a natural way, and do something useful for you based on that natural language is kind of building from that. And I think that's one of the most powerful things right now. There was, just to kind of give you a personal example, I don't know how I ended up on this, but I was like deep in Reddit on like the physics subreddit at some point. I was probably woke up in the middle of the night, couldn't get back to sleep. And of course, the thing that you do in the middle of the night when you can't get back to sleep is you read about black holes. But I saw something on the subreddit that didn't make sense to me, even as a black hole nerd. I'm not a physicist. I don't know all the specifics, but I know that I can ask ChatGPT to behave like a physicist tutor to help me understand some of these things. So I copied the text from Reddit, which was well beyond my capability to understand. And I went to ChatGPT and I pasted in that text. And then I told it, I need you to act like a physics tutor and explain this to me like I'm a freshman in high school. And it did. And by the end of that interaction, which took about 5 minutes, I felt satisfied in my level of understanding of the content that I had found. And so that's the kind of thing that AI can do at scale, as long as we're training it with the right data and we have the right constraints on it. So if you can imagine as a tutor that's trained specifically on a product, it could answer questions about that. It can adopt different perspectives. It can adopt different language styles. And that's the kind of personalization that I think can be really powerful for the learner of the future. But getting there from theory to large scale application is not necessarily easy. Yeah, the hardest part is knowing what to ask and how to ask it. I think the one thing that's really useful with AI is this idea of shadow boxing. So you tell it to kind of like act as a coach and then go through interactions with you. And that's a good way of kind of thinking through how you might use language to frame up an idea or where you can correct misunderstandings. Again, one big challenge for folks in doing that is making sure that the AI isn't hallucinating, that it's actually giving you correct information. So it's easy to interact with AI, Chat GPT, Claude, and such. It's a different thing to be able to rely on it at scale. But it's going to become easier and easier as our lead AI consultant likes to tell us at ELB Learning. This is the worst AI you will ever interact with. It's only going to get better. Okay. Last couple things. I want to talk a little bit about culture and continuous learning. It's not a technology, really. You can have, your culture will manifest in the technology that you use, whether you're using Slack or whatever, or email and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things that we've seen as kind of a cultural shift in the workplace is the idea of this growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I think we're going to continue to see that accelerate because the pace of change isn't going to slow down. And it's more about not necessarily accepting that the pace of change, but more just accepting change is kind of a fact of everyday life and just part of the work. Part of the work that you do isn't just executing a process, it's getting to a result. And if we can shift our mindset to that, then we can also kind of embrace learning as more of a daily practice, both within our own workflow but also within the culture of an organization. And so I think this is, when it comes to the topic of the day, which is generational engagement, I think focusing on culture and how it relates to learning is something that can really pay dividends, because it doesn't matter what technology that you're adopting. It doesn't matter what you're trying to teach. If you have good fundamentals in your culture and those that the culture embraces learning, then you will have a group of people who will continually try to push themselves and try to adopt these new perspectives. And that'll help them not just learn from formal programs, but also learn from each other. I hope this for every organization. I know it's not always possible to do, but this idea that failure is not something that necessarily gets you fired, but something that you can learn from, and you have coaches and your colleagues available to help you learn from that, so that the organization gets better over time, based on your individual experience. Whether you had a experience that felt like failure or felt like success, those are both things that can help you learn. Yeah, a fall, not a fail. You get up to try again. Yep. Yeah. Oh, I'm so jealous of Desiree, who's got an entire culture department. That's amazing. Okay, so last few minutes today, just in the chat, I'd like to hear from you what approaches or thoughts kind of really stuck with you. What's one or two things that you're going to take away from today's conversation and bring back to your own organization? I definitely said a lot of words today, but there was so much good stuff happening in the chat. One of the things I'm going to do later is go back and read what you all wrote, because there were so many interesting kind of anecdotes and pieces of experience that you all shared. So I'm curious if you find any of the 4 takeaways that I'm showing on screen to be one of the things you're kind of gonna underscore and bring back with you, or if there was something else that you saw. Cool.
And I'm actually just changed the layout here, so then there is a new pod here. So what are your best takeaways from today's session? It's just below the rate the session pod. Go ahead and you can type either in chat or in the main takeaway area, and we will share these with both Ellen and ELB. Oh, let me reopen it. There we go. Sorry. It closed on me and I didn't see that there. Now it's open. You can put your main takeaways and most useful idea. Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're kind of wrapping things up and we're getting some of these last kind of bits of information from one another, I also want to say that if you want to talk more, if you want to talk about the challenges and the triumphs and the ideas you have going on in your organization, happy to talk more. We're actually kind of running a promo for that, so you can always reach out to us and book time to chat. We love to do that with you, but we also have a little promo right now where if you do schedule a call with us, we're going to enter you to win an all expenses paid trip to DevLearn 2024. which is later this year. So you can grab that QR code from the slide right now, or you can go to our website and you can see more information out there.
And I was sneaky,
regardless,
Ellen. I just
yeah,
launched on people's browsers the page in ELB Learning on the summer event. So
that is sneaky.
yeah, right.
I was wondering why I did that. I'm like, why? I didn't click that. Suddenly it's open. That's powerful. Anyway, to answer the question that I saw in chat, my favorite pizza place in Duluth is Toppers. They have a vegan buffalo chicken pizza, and I'm not vegan, but that pizza is so good that when we order that pizza, I'm vegan for a little bit while I eat it. It's delicious. Yes, we're wrapping things up right now. Loving what I'm seeing in the chat. Oh, Kristen notes that the rate the session poll is closed right now. But I see
Oh,
Leslie. Yeah.
thank you. Sorry about that. It defaults and it's hard to catch. There we go. Thank you very much.
Okay. Um, got it. Got it. Kristen has opened up again. Okay. I think Leslie, for me, sums it up is that people are individuals first, right? And the tendencies are not formulas. But we can still keep those tendencies in consideration as we're making plans for things. All right. So I think we're at time, Philip. I'm really glad everyone was able to come. Fantastic chat. Great group. I hope to see you all out there.
And Ellen, not only do you do a fantastic presentation, but you end on time. I mean, it's stunning. It really is. Thank you for a wonderful session here today. We're continuing the recording just in case anybody wants to sneak in I've seen a lot of thank yous or a last moment question here. But look for the recording. I know a lot of you will want to share it. Look for the recording to post in Training Magazine Network here a little bit later today. Ellen, look at all the thank yous that you're getting and the useful ideas and takeaways again, and also the great comments here. Thanks. And don't
Yeah, I
forget
really
to check out.
appreciate the engagement. What was that, Philip?
I was just going to say, don't forget to check out more about the Summer of Learning there, or just also go to click on the lower left there and go to main ELB Learning website. We're very thankful to the ELB Learning for making today's event possible. And keep those takeaways and most useful ideas coming. There is the certificate also for those of you who want to print out a certificate of participation and apply for ATD credit. There, the instructions are there in the very bottom on the very right. And I'm going to go ahead and once again here, you're still live, Ellen, but we just turned off your video here momentarily as we thank ELB Learning again for making today's event possible. Keep those answers coming and the most useful ideas or takeaways. Don't forget to print out a certificate of participation and learn how there on the bottom. Ellen, once again, thank you for an incredible presentation here today for Training Magazine Network and our members.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. Great group.
All right, we look forward to seeing you back here at Training Magazine Network soon. We have a lot of great events coming up, and look for more from ELB Learning also. To make sure and check that calendar frequently. And don't forget to check the recording archive. Just put in ELB as a search, and you'll see a whole library of great recordings from all of the experts at ELB and beyond. So thank you again to ELB Learning for making today's event possible. And this very special thank you to all of you for attending today's event. We look forward to seeing you back here soon. Thanks.